do hope that you enjoyed yourself and now that you're refreshed and ready for work. Today, we are going to be discussing a topic that has become one that is very hot and for which there is now a global debate focused on all those nations who built their wealth by denying people humanity. All those metropolitan countries, England and France and Holland and Portugal, those European countries. And of course, the discussion will center around reparations. And what type of a justice do we expect? Is it retributive justice? Is it retributive? Are we getting back? Or is it restorative justice, repairing something that obviously was wrong and giving us our fair due? Well, today I have with me Ms. Carla Astafan, who is the chairperson of the St. Kitts and Nevis National Reparations Committee. She is here to discuss what the committee is doing in terms of reparations, the objectives of the committee, and other things pertaining to this whole global debate, regional debate, local debate that is going on with respect to reparations. Carla, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lesroy Williams, for inviting me here today. I know we were supposed to be here last week, but given the rains, the storm, this is the time of year when we are impacted by storms, and so we felt that first one last week Wednesday, and so we could not do the show during the week where we were doing this media blitz focusing on emancipation and reparations, because it was very what we pushed for was to do this media blitz during that week so that we could sensitize people around the subject. And so we're happy to be here today. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here, to share with your audience as much as possible on this topic.
Right. Thank you so much, Carla. I also have with me Mr. Laughlin Tatum, who is a member of the St. Kitts and Nevis National Reparations Committee. He has joined us today to also share. And why is it so important for us to be dealing with reparations at this present time? Mr. Tatum, welcome.
Well, it's a privilege to be here. Thank you very much for such a warm welcome and invitation. The issue of reparation is very troublesome for some people. But nevertheless, for us who are descendants of slaves, it is essential to look into, the way I would put it simply, what we are owed. If people owe you, if you have worked for someone, in this case, in the case of the slaves, against their will, enabling them to earn the type of wealth they have accumulated and acquired on the backs of the slaves, I think it is only fair to require that the workers, the descendants of the workers, and indirectly the workers themselves be compensated.
Right.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Can I just make a little correction? During the past week, we did not only have members of the committee make presentations in the media, but alongside us, because we want to broaden the viewpoint, hear broad views on the issue. And so even though Mr. Tatum, you mentioned that he's a member of the committee, as for now, he's not a member, but I know he's a very conscious person. He's very opinionated, And so, you know, he's a teacher of history and other subjects, English, literature, and so on. So he's very well versed, and so we identified people within the community who we felt could speak widely on the topic, and so he was due to be on the show with me last week, and he's here today, and I thank him for joining us.
Carla, there are those who are saying, of course, that the case for British slavery, especially in our case, British slave reparations can no longer be brushed aside. Mm-hmm. In fact, England, have they ever apologized for the transatlantic slave trade? And they trafficked, England trafficked more enslaved Africans than almost any other nation. Well, around 3 million on British ships. Mm-hmm. But has that nation ever expressed regret?
Well, one of the
or
things,
an apology. There are some. There's statements of regret and apology. Mm-hmm. They're not really the same thing, technically. But before we get into all of that, Carla, I want you to tell us a brief history of the National Reparations Committee.
Okay.
Why it was started, who are some of the members, what is its contribution, what are the objectives of this committee?
This committee was put together by the Office of the Prime Minister earlier this year. We had our first meeting February 9th, if my memory serves me right. There's a mandate which was issued by Caricom, as a matter of fact, let me just say, put it this way. Back in 2013, Caribbean heads of government established the Caricom Reparations Commission with a mandate to prepare the case for reparatory justice for the region's indigenous and African descendant communities who are victims of crimes against humanity in the forms of genocide, slavery, slave trading, and racial apartheid. So, after the formation of the Caricom Reparations Commission, all the countries within Caricom were supposed to put together their own local committees so that they could have representation on the commission. We had a committee, from what I understand, prior committee was put together. As a matter of fact, some of the current members are on it, back on this committee again. So this committee started, and for whatever reason, it did not continue on. I think the person who chaired it at the time left Ireland, and nothing else was done. I know that there was a lot happening at a Caricom level, and I had appealed to the Prime Minister on a few occasions as to what about our representation at a Caricom level, because we had symposiums in Antigua, there was a conference in Trinidad late last year, and things were happening, and we had no one going to represent St. Kitts. We hadn't heard about reparations for a while, and everything seemed to have died. So I guess, given that I was, always messaging him about it, he decided to look at reformulating the committee, and so he asked me whether I would be willing to chair the committee, and I consented to that. And so they invited a wide cross-section of people from various organizations to the first meeting. The people who attended were Andrew Satney from the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Cara Daly, a youth representative, Rahim Berry, who works here at SKNIS, John Raskalunji Jeffers, who is very much well known as an activist and a Rastafarian for many years. He has a shop downtown, and he's very versed in issues of reparations. Ras Iroy Pinney from Nevis, He was also on the committee before, and so he's also very well versed in all of the issues. They came well loaded with the documents. I mean, they were way ahead of me in terms of their, advocacy for reparations. And Ms. Sheila Morris, who's a lecturer, a history lecturer and sociology lecturer at Clarence Fitzroy Bryan College. So those are the people attending this very first meeting. We know that our mandate, just as Caricom has a mandate, they would like for us to bring to the public as much as possible on the, a lot of information regarding reparations. We want to lift the consciousness of people. Many of us, go by without remembering our past, and as they say, people without a past, what's the rest of it, Tatum? So it's not coming to me right now. But anyway, this is it. So we need to recall, remind, come up with things, activities, that can build the consciousness, build the knowledge and so on of our people, and this is what we are hoping to do. So this past week, with Emancipation Day looming, we conducted this media blitz to raise visibility of the committee and to bring the topic to the fore. And so we've had members of the public calling in and giving their views, which is quite great. And we've had, members, as I said, whom we invited to actually come on the various shows and give of their ideas. So it was a great initiative by the committee.
Mm-hmm. Now, Carla, this whole issue of reparations has now come to the fore and is a hot debate in the Caribbean. Now, after centuries, why has it become so necessary to have this debate? Why has it not done before? Why was it not done before? Why now, after so many years? And the debate, about reparations has conveniently been branded extreme, unrealistic by those who don't want to pay them. And for example, we happily listened to the heir to the throne, His Royal Highness Prince Charles, who on Windrush Day, and we all know what the Windrush generation and so on, said Britain owed a debt of gratitude to the people of the Caribbean, while ignoring the reality that what Britain owes is in fact a straight-up financial debt.
Indeed.
Do you think that Britain only owes, Mr. Tatum, a debt of gratitude to the Caribbean, or they owe us more? And why? And what do they owe us?
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. The Western world, the so-called developed world, is developed, quote unquote, primarily because of slavery. We go to Europe today, we go to the United States of America, and we marvel at the level of development. It was nowhere so. They didn't have the resources to make those things happen. But what we find is that Europeans, they are explorers by nature. I suppose human beings generally speaking, but they somehow had the wherewithal and in fact the absolute necessity they needed to explore. Right? Because before slavery started, we know very well that Europe, before they reached Africa, West Africa, in fact, the Dutch were the first to get there. They were the big explorers. And then the Spanish came after, and then the English followed and colonized places like St. Kitts and Nevis and so on. But we know that Europe was reeking with illness. Diseases, we still have some of the remnants of it today. We know that the Caribs and Arawaks, the Kalinago, and the the TNOs that they met here, we know that they brought their terrible diseases down here. And millions died in a very, very short period of time. But they were the first, the Dutch were the first to get in, to reach to Africa. And we know very well, the historians tell us that they have to blame the Catholic priest. His name was Bartholomew de las Casas for slavery. It is claimed that he was the one who introduced, who stated that because, I hope I'm answering your question, right? That because Las Casas, because the TNOs and the Cardinagos, mainly the TNOs, were dying out so rapidly, he was the one who went back to Spain and recommended that slaves be brought out of West Africa. But the thing about it is that they didn't only bring slaves. They brought the other valuables. There are people who claim very erroneously that, well, why should we be seeking reparations? Africans sold each other. That's a very common thing we hear.
Yes.
But the truth of the matter is that the Africans, for the preservation of their own lives, they practically had no choice. Because we very well know that there were conflicts in Africa before the Europeans got there. Wherever you have human beings, you're going to have conflict. So it's no strange thing that there was conflict. But the Europeans required, demanded on the death, on the slaughter of African leaders, that they must be permitted to pass through African territories with slaves. And not only did they move with the slaves, but they moved with the resources as well. And the most important resource of all that they came out of Africa with was not the material, but with the people. Because without labor, without a labor force, no matter what you have, you can get nowhere. So they came out with the most valuable and the most useful resource of all, which was the labor force.
Right, and so you had a sort of a mercantile system. But at the very same time, Mr. Tate, you mentioned something and I want you to clarify. Did you have slaves coming to the Caribbean, or you had Africans who came to the Caribbean who were enslaved?
That's a very good question. That's a very good way to put it. There are people who claim that they were slaves in Africa. But if you were to read the Bible, you will find very similar things, a lot of things that took place in the Bible, that are mentioned in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, were happening in Africa. In fact, if you read the Bible, you're reading Africa. Right? And we know, for example, just for one example, the story of David, of Joseph. Joseph was sold. He was sold to Pharaoh. Common names, right? Mm-hmm. He was sold to Pharaoh. But Joseph was able to become a ruler in Pharaoh's palace. Okay? But with the European brand of slavery, because I wouldn't call what Joseph was a slave. Joseph was not a slave. Just like the other Africans who were servants of kings and so on in Africa, they were not slaves. In fact, what we call slaves, the Africans who had black servants, which they captured in war, they captured them in war and so on, and they were made to serve. An African slave, quote unquote, could have married his owner's daughter. Mm-hmm. And own property and kingdoms and inherit his children could inherit. Nothing like that took place under the Eurocentric, the European brand of slavery. It was, the European slavery was brutal. It was cruel. It was wicked. It was evil, and it was deliberate. Those people were vicious. And up to today, we are still bearing the consequence, many of the consequences, not only the economic consequences, but the sociological consequences of slavery. A lot of our behavior to each other, or the divisiveness among us, has come out of the system of slavery, which was imported, the attitudes that these Europeans had, they transported into Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But the most important resource of all was the strength of the black man and the black woman that was brought out of Ghana and out of Nigeria and other West African places.
You know, while we talk, though, and we're going to get to the 10-point Caricom plan in a little while, but while we talk about such things like you heard about Garveyism and Back to Africa movement, you've heard also about Pan-Africanism and all of that. There is a theory that says that Africans on the continent do not view us, people in the Caribbean, as pure Africans, as a sort of a bastardized type of Africans, or they even think that somehow they are superior to us. They do not see us as their full brothers and sisters. Somehow that is out there.
You want me to respond, or can
I want you to respond to that.
That's a whole other area, and it speaks to what Mr. Tatum spoke about, the divisiveness. You know, that is something that's a whole other, that could take the conversation in a whole other direction. Mm-hmm. Okay, but that is part of what the divide and rule continues up to this day. But I really cannot buy into it. Okay, I believe even if because we are mixed at the end of the day. Many of us, you know, some of us may still be pure today, but many of us have some percentage of European in us, and it's no doubt about that. So I'm not going to go down that vein. Africans themselves may be mixed because you had Europeans colonizing there as well. So that's a whole other topic. I think one of the things I'd like to address, you asked the question, why now? Why now for reparations? As a matter of fact, Sir Hilary Beckles talks about Sir Arthur Lewis, who back in the 1930s wrote the name of the book always fails me. But anyway, he spoke about him as one of the first to put the idea of reparations forward. Okay? So it's not a now thing. The thing is that these countries started becoming independent in the 60s, and at that time we were, you know, had about 60% illiteracy within the region. Jamaica could, you know, speak directly to that. And look at what we have done with the little that we've had. Okay, so when Sir Arthur Lewis put forward this economic strategy back in the 1930s, if that had been taken on board, just think of how much further we could have been. Seeing that we have done so much, look at our illiteracy rate right now, it's far lower. You know, look at all of the strides we have made. Look at how the type of life we have. Some may say that it's, you know, very different from what we are used to. We are going more modern, but the whole world is progressing, right? In the meantime, we here in the Caribbean, we are struggled with a number of things that keep us back at the same time. Our health, you talk about, you know, the diets which were, and Sir Hilary Beckles talks about that a lot, our health. The fact that the diet which was given to us, a diet which many of us still use today. We struggle with not, you know, using sugar. We struggle about not using salt. High salt, high sugar diets, which and we end up having these non-communicable diseases like diabetes and hypertension. So all of these things, okay, we have the indigenous people who are marginalized as well. Within our society, again, the divide and rule comes into play, because I grew up on the island of Dominica, where we were saying, you know, referring to the Kalinago as if they were less than we were. You understand? So it is today, in the last few years, you've had a resurgence of, building up the Kalinago people. So there's a different way of looking at them today. Okay, but I remember we used to have a little song that we used to sing. You know, I wouldn't bother try and sing for you. But that's the sort of thing. You had this attitude, and it actually came from what Europeans said. The Caribs were so fierce, they were so wild, they were so, all of those things. They called them the Caribs, the Kalinago. And why were they calling them that? It is simply because these people were fighting back. Okay, people talk about, and I have read where the indigenous people actually helped the Africans to run away, the Maroons of Dominica and so on. Here in St. Kitts, you know, the Kalinago were decimated, you know. So we know that so much went on. All of these people are still living in abject poverty in many places, you know, Dominica and St. Vincent. You have the Garifuna people and so on who are mixed. So there's a lot to be done. Our people are suffering and continue to suffer today in large part. Right. There's still a lot to be done. Right,
so there has been some cultural erasure, of course, with the coming of the Europeans who sort of imposed their culture on the Caribbean. And there is more work that needs to be done in terms of cultural retention and cultural reproduction. However, Carla, you mentioned something which I find to be very interesting, and you were talking about Sir Arthur Lewis and his economic thesis, that of industrialization by invitation. That is what it is actually called, and it was a way that he saw of these developed countries coming into the Caribbean with these multinational companies and so on, and industries and so on. And by that, they will teach skills and they will help with our own development. Now, has that paradigm worked over the years is a question that can be debated, because yet the work that is given from these multinational companies to people in the Caribbean are the lower end jobs. You have a lot of repatriation of the profits going out of the country and so on. A lot of them, they benefit from the tax haven and all of that sort of a thing. Sometimes they're only interested in profit. And when profit no longer works for them, they pack up and they go. And of course, they leave our people out in the cold. Now, the systemic poverty that remains in the Caribbean, it is being said, can be directly traced to the era of enslavement and colonialism, at the end of which Britain walked away, leaving 60% of the region's black inhabitants functionally illiterate. And the industrialization by invitation by Sir Arthur Lewis, is it another form of neocolonialism? Mr. Tatum, what do you say to that?
Well, before I go there, I want to, you kind of started with the issue of Africans not seeing us as being relatives, as being genuinely African, and I don't think I should let that die an unnatural death there, because it is true from my knowledge and experience that too many Africans in Nigeria and Ghana and other West African states, they don't know practically anything about slavery. I've spoken to them, and the truth is that some of them didn't know a lot of the things that we know. They're shocked, because we do history in school. Here, we go to school and we learn about history, emancipation, and so on. They don't learn those things. And I agree with you and Sir Arthur Lewis that the industrialization, as we call it today, as we understand it today, is in fact another level of slavery under the pretense of assistance, under the guise of support and development and so on. Whose development? We are still contributing as black people to the development of Europe and the United States of America. Isn't it like a young boy today? I heard of a young fellow a couple of days ago. I was talking to him. And when he was coming out of the place where we were talking, somebody told him something. He said, boy, I have a passport. I have a red passport. And he was quite pleased to state that although he is a Kitishan, he doesn't belong here. Mm-hmm. Where does that type of mentality come from? That is a slave mentality. And it has come out of the concept that anything but us is different. It came from somewhere else. And this is why, as Sir Arthur Lewis was a visionary, made reference to what is happening even today in every single Caribbean country. Look at what is happening in Venezuela today. And the rest of us in the Caribbean sit down trembling because we're afraid. We are still, to a large extent, slaves with a different kind of chain. Mm-hmm. And it is true, they're ours. And they should pay.
Right. Now, Mr. Tatum, Walter Rodney, of course, wrote his famous book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
That's right.
Earlier, Carla, you spoke about how somehow Caribbean societies can still be very much divided. Do you think that this division among us contributes to our own underdevelopment? And for example, for a cause, even as reparations, how do you sell this to the Caribbean people? Because something that happened hundreds of years ago, you have somebody today who is 10 years old, who is 12 years old. What does that really have to do with me?
Mm-hmm. Okay. What does that have to do with them? Yes, I know a lot of our children today, a lot of our people today. Sometimes I actually wonder, how are we going to get through what, and this is something that the callers can actually weigh in on, as to what does this actually mean to them, if it means anything at all. Because some of us may be talking about this, but for the majority of the populace, it may not mean anything. However, I am looking at social media, I'm constantly on social media, and I know that actually, what else is that I see people's comments. So I know our people are very much aware. Many of our people are very much aware of their history. Okay, they know, they've learned it. People keep talking about the fact that our history isn't taught, but I do believe it is taught. Maybe it needs some tweaking, right? But I think the history has to be taught in a way that the children will appreciate, have a better understanding of the history, build their consciousness, things like that. I am trying to think in terms of this past week, okay? We've been raising the consciousness, and I've been hearing a lot of the comments coming through, and a lot of it has been surrounding education. So we have to show our people how it is, all of this happens, so that they get an understanding. We have impacted a lot by the media. What's going on in America seems to impact us a lot. And so we need to zone our people in, try and bring back some of the culture, bring back, enlighten them about our way of life, tell the stories, read the history, let them get an appreciation. I tried to do that in my own way. I remember very early on with my children, especially my girls. By then there were some books that were written with strong African consciousness. So I remember reading to my daughter books like when I look in the mirror, what do I see? I see, you know, she's brown and like chocolate, and that sort of thing, you know. So you start to, or A is for Africa, B is for some other things. I can't remember all of them because my children are much bigger right now. But that sort of thing, you know, all the books where they could see themselves portrayed. There were those books being offered on Scholastic. I don't know how many parents might have seen them and bought them, or my sisters in the States sent books for me. And that is the way in which I try to build a consciousness. I try, you know, when I see my daughter looking at television, let's look at something African, you know, so that you can develop that. I speak to her about TikTok. I said, you're on TikTok? I go on TikTok and I actually see some uplifting things. So it's for us to show them that, you know, who you are is actually just as good or better than others, because they're going to meet the world out there. They're going to go to the States. They're going to be impacted by what goes on. You know, we have been dealing with so much here. You know, we haven't had enough to uplift us. That's what I'd like to say. So it is for our committee now to try and raise that consciousness as much as possible.
You mentioned something important, Carla, because why would any young person of African descent in today's society want to identify with Africa when all that they see is a dark continent where there's a lot of poverty, where there's a lot of disease, where there's a lot of problems in terms of governance, where there's famine? You know, these are the things that we see. Why would anybody want to identify with that? Or why would anybody even want to go back or to be repatriated to that? And so, how do you see that, what is being put out there, and how do you teach your children all the positive things in terms of who they are and their history, their ancestry, where they would have come from, and so on? Because there has been, by Europeans, a lot of psychological conditioning. You ever wonder where this thing about bleaching has come from?
Okay,
and why the bleaching industry is so big in places like Jamaica and so on and so on? What is our concept of beauty, and what really has been taught to us?
Mr. Williams, you're asking me a lot of questions at one time. So let us go one by one, and let me talk about Africa and why our children should actually want to go back to Africa, why I want to go to Africa. Okay, it means we have to get away from what the media is showing us. I have seen an Africa with beaches as beautiful as ours. So I love the idea of going to a place where there's a beach. I want to go to the beach nearly every single day. So when I saw pictures of places in Africa where there's beach nearby, of course that appeals to me and it looks good, right? The coconut trees along the beach and that sort of thing. I started following a couple on YouTube who actually left England and have resettled in Ghana. I see their nice house. I see that they go to the market and they're spending less money. They're eating good food. So it depends on us, what we want to see. The other day, someone spoke about going to Africa and seeing Burger King and KFC. I'm not interested in that. I am interested in the fact that you can get the good African diet. I'm interested in the culture. I'm interested in the fact that people work and they can have nice grand houses. A friend of mine from Nigeria showed me pictures of her house that she's building, and you know, the design, the use of all these different design elements, putting stone together, putting wood together, you know, the layout and everything. Nothing like what we have here. Very creative. You understand? So this is the Africa that we do not see. We do not see the Africa of the vibrant markets. We do not see the Africa. I remember going to Belgium and being amazed at these African women, like, who were making pottery. I use a wheel to throw my pottery. And there are these women with a little bowl, and they put the clay on it, and boom, and next thing there's a grand pot in front of me. Okay? So we have to look and find things about Africa that is positive, that is empowering, so that our children can know. You know, what the media is showing, you have the same thing. I go to New York, I go past through Harlem, and my skin is crawling because, you know, it's a mess. I go to other parts of the city, you know, that's all dirty. Our people live in Harlem, you know, our black people, they're spaced out, you know, they're not being treated, they're seeking something because America doesn't really care about them per se. You understand? So they're on drugs, they're on all, you know, so there's that part. You know, I know there's the positives in Harlem as well, and so let me, you know, there are people who are doing positive things. But, you know, bad things can happen anywhere. There are terrible slums in London and all over the world. So they only want to show us that which is African and say Africans are living this way and that way. Africa has a lot of beauty. They have, you know, and this is why Africa is being sought by all of these major countries. Weren't they the ones who went and carved up Africa for themselves? So why is Africa so bad if they want to take all of Africa's resources? You know, we really have to look into things and see what is the truth, you know, behind the whole thing that is being put out to us. As you talk about skin, with the bleaching, we've seen colorism, you know, we've seen over the years that the lighter complexion people, we've had this, you know, if a very dark person and a light-skinned person walk into a room for an interview, it may be the lighter-skinned person may more likely get it. We see the performers who get through. We have Jamaican artists, I think Popcorn and Alkaline and those young people follow. They have bleached, and so they are bleaching as well. You see you know, so all of these things are happening right now, and so our people want to follow. I don't think it's happening too much here, but it is happening. We have to build that love of self. We need to get back to that point. As I have said on other shows, in the 1970s, there was the Black Power movement. The Afro was big, you know. The love of self. Black is beautiful. Black is powerful. All of this black consciousness was building. And this is why, for me, as a young person, a 10, 11-year-old at that time, with uncles wearing dreadlocks and friends and so on, and these discussions happening, we had a place in Dominica called Four Corners where the guys were all, you know, putting out information and that sort of thing. Built my consciousness. And this is why I am the person that I am today. Yeah. So if we begin this talk right now, our children will be listening. I know my children will be overhearing what I'm saying, and so they will have that type of consciousness themselves, and that's what will happen throughout the wider community. You agree, Mr. Tatum?
Yes, Carla, some people will tell you that the bleaching and so on has nothing to do with black consciousness. It has nothing to do with how I love myself. It is simply a fashion statement. Just like I wear a pair of shoes or something like that. Some people are saying that it is just a matter of fashion. But
it stems from somewhere.
But we have to look deeper than that. Where does it come from? The straightening of the hair, putting all these chemicals and so on. Now, Mr. Tatum, slavery has been justified as a necessary evil. We've heard that. It was a necessary evil. If there's such a thing as a necessary evil. But here it is that you have Caricom heads in 2013 establishing a Caricom Reparations Commission and saying that African descendant communities were victims of crimes against humanity. So, necessary evil, crimes against humanity. Could you tell us a little bit more in terms of what is Caricom's argument and its 10-point plan?
Earlier in the discussion, you did ask, what is the difference between slavery and slavery? And I think that is a very important point. Slavery was a form of oppression. It 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 about the divisions among us, and the issue of reparation is just one of those. There are people who feel very, very strongly that reparations is a necessary thing. The damage must be repaired. And there are others who say, no. What do you want to go back there for? Who are the people today? Where are the slaves? We were not slaves. Why should we be paid? People have said that to me. And I've asked them a simple question. And my question has been, are the descendants of Europeans today? Are the descendants, the children of the slave owners benefiting from slavery? And if you will to be honest, you'd have to say yes. I could name some members of the American House of Representatives whose backyard is bigger than St. Kitts. The backyard. They didn't buy it. One of the former presidents of the United States of America, I'm not going to call his name, he has a bicycle race on his land every year. He brings his friends with their bicycles, and they have a race in his backyard every year, crossing over streams and valleys and rivers. And the backyard where he runs his bicycle race is bigger than 68 square miles. I could name some others. Where did they get that? How did they get it? They got it from the backs of their slaves. Now the grandfather, who was a slave owner, is no longer there. The grandmother is no longer there. But are their children benefiting from it? Yes, they are. But if they are benefiting, they should pay.
Okay.
Yes, and so I'd like to follow up on that.
The 10-point
Before
plan.
we even get into that, I want to follow up on what Tatum is saying, because we see it even here today. Tatum went to the American dynamic, but just last week or the week before, I was looking at the British legacies of slavery. And we saw that there was 791 claims were paid out at the abolition of slavery. I've gone through a number of them, from Abednego, Matthew at Buckley's estate, to the Church of England at Parsons, to the Fairfields, or what's his name calls it, who got lands at who got paid for the enslaved, and all of these people. I even sent one to Tatum. Tatum, should I say so? Yes. But the number of enslaved persons that you owned, you were compensated for it. So at the end of the day, what we've seen is that the people who owned the land in St. Kitts, even up to today, I know we had lands that were nationalized by the government, and let us even pause here for a moment to say, yes, at the abolition of slavery, the planters, £20 million was paid out to planters throughout the British colonies for the loss of their enslaved. Here in St. Kitts, you had 791 payouts, some of them getting thousands of pounds, some of them getting as little as 58 or 100 pounds and so on. But that still is equivalent to a lot of money today. But for the big landowners, they continued in sugar. And as you know, at the start of the 1900s, they were the ones who created the centralization of the sugar industry. And we know the story. Now, when Bradshaw nationalized the cane land, so they've gotten paid out of that 20 million, they got paid for the apprenticeship was also a part of the payment, you know, because it wasn't the 20 million, whatever they were going to be paid out wasn't enough. So that other 4 years of apprenticeship was another payment. Now, when Bradshaw nationalized the lands in 1970, all the planters who were still producing cane were also paid again. As a matter of fact, they were paid, I think, Robert Bradshaw wanted to pay them, the premier at the time wanted to pay them 10 million, okay? But their lawyers got them 23 million, okay? Am I on target? I'm not Kittian, but I'm not firstly Kittian, but I've done my research. So, those who were out of cane, let us look at those who were out of cane. They still have those lands today. They were able to build developments. They were able to sell those lands. They were able to have money, okay, that the people who worked on those estates don't have. They didn't have that kind of wealth. You understand? We continue to still buy the lands. The lands that the government acquired, we have to buy it. So what did we get at the end of the day? What did ordinary people get? They had to buy lands for X amount of dollars and struggle for a lifetime to pay for it. So there has been no compensation, while the people who they worked for were compensated thrice, right? So we had the, we've had no land. Up to today, our people are struggling to get land. The farmers who want large acreage, you know, it's a struggle. We have actually started selling land once again to people who have the money. It's always about the money. It's about those who have the money. You understand? So we are left with this sort of lack of development, lack of, you know, being able to move forward. The land is sitting there right now. We had this land that now is in the hand of the banks and so on. What do we do? What do we have to say for that? You understand? So when people are talking, and just recently I think I commented on a post that very thing. Many of the people who have today, who are wealthy today, they are wealthy because of where they came from, of who had in their family. And you know the names. I'm not going to be saying it here on the show, so you know you can do the research. British Legacies of Slavery is online. Mm-hmm.
Right, so I want the audience to know Caricom has set up this Caricom Reparations Commission, and their argument is that what happened on the slavery was a crime against humanity, where these metropolitan countries were developed on the backs of slave labor, unpaid slave labor, and of course, as a result of that, we remained undeveloped and underdeveloped. So what is CARICOM's focus in terms of how that should be repaired in terms of their strategy? They developed a 10-point strategy. Could we hear a little bit about that 10-point strategy?
So the 10-point action plan speaks to, number one, a full formal apology. The healing process for victims and the descendants of the enslaved and enslavers requires as a precondition the offer of a sincere formal apology. You spoke about that earlier, Mr. Williams.
Yes.
And so they need that by the governments of Europe. Some governments, in refusing to offer an apology, have issued in place statements of regrets. You would have talked to that. Such statements do not actually acknowledge crimes that have been committed and represent a refusal to take responsibility for such crimes. Statements of regrets represent furthermore a reprehensible response to the call for apology, in that they suggest that victims and their descendants are not worthy of an apology. Only an explicit formal apology will suffice within the context of the CARICOM reparatory justice program. Number two is repatriation. We spoke to that a little earlier, as to over 10 million people were stolen from their homes in Africa, forcibly transported to the Caribbean as enslaved chattel and property of Europeans. The transatlantic slave trade is the largest forced migration in human history and has no parallel in terms of man's inhumanity to man. This trade in enchained bodies was a highly successful commercial business for the nations of Europe. And when we speak about that, it's not only that they were bringing, you know, the whole industry of the shipyards, creating ships specific to, you know, keeping people in chains. That was a whole industry, okay, up there in England. That it says, okay, so we need to. Then I'm not going to go through all of them in detail. The indigenous people, we spoke about that. I brought that up earlier, development program. The cultural institution, Tatum spoke to that. You can go to Europe and you can go to all these museums, you can see all these buildings, you can read about their history. I think, you know, you can go through, you can find out about their history and see their culture and so on. We need to build those institutions as well. We need to lift, you know, ourselves culturally. The public health crisis, we spoke to that earlier. I mentioned that and spoke to what Sir Henry Beckles talked about. Illiteracy eradication, we spoke to that as well. The fact that the countries were largely illiterate at the time of independence, and so there's a push for illiteracy eradication. An African knowledge program, and again, that's something we brought up here, you know, knowing about Africa so that you could be, you know, with children, we can have exchanges and that sort of thing. Tatum, you know, a lot of times we talk about going to America, going to England, you know, let us find out more about Africa. The psychological, and Tatum spoke to that as well, psychological rehabilitation, technology transfer. This is where we are also,
behind.
yeah, we have been, yeah, we need to make those advances technologically and scientifically. Debt cancellation, a lot of our governments have struggled with debt, trying to push us forward, so I think that's the 10 points. As to whether more will be added to it, I think they are looking at that, but for now, that's what the 10-point plan.
Carla, I was amazed a few years ago when I was in England and I went to Liverpool. And Liverpool has a number of museums. In fact, they have a slave museum in Liverpool and other museums. And I often wondered, where did they get all of these cultural items? They were basically taken from Africa.
Well, if
a lot of stuff and so on. And they're there in museums.
If I may add something to this. The crown that Queen Elizabeth wears, the jewels in the crown, she didn't buy them. Europe does not produce those things. Where did she get them? Who she paid for them? How much they cost? Who put them there?
Good question. Anyway, we are going to go to the phone lines and to hear what people have to say. The numbers to call are 466-2666, 466-2666, 662-8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, 767-4765, and the international number is 1-239-645-4500. That is 1-239-645-4500. Maybe some questions that our audience can focus on. For example, what form would reparations take? What form would it take? How much should be paid? How will it be quantified? How will it be distributed? Will it raise questions of distributive justice?
The question goes to
any one of you.
I don't think that black people could be adequately and fully or efficiently or sufficiently compensated for the quality and the value of the work that has been pumped into this Western world. It's not possible to compensate the labor efficiently, effectively, sufficiently. One of those words must be correct. Sufficiently for the contribution, the labor that they have used, and from which, as we said many times today, the developed world still benefits. So the thing about it, though, is whether or not you can adequately compensate us. The debt remains. We are nevertheless owed. And as I suggested earlier, if the descendants of those owners of our people are benefiting today, then the descendants of those who enabled them to benefit today should all today. It's only right and it's only fair. Figure out a way. The problem is that the people who owe us are saying, we don't owe anything. Who do we owe it to? Who should we pay? Well, look at your children. Aren't they benefiting? Well, we should benefit in somewhere as well. The descendants of the slaves should benefit in somewhere. So the question as to who to pay is a non-issue.
Mr. Tatum, you have to realize that slavery did not come to an end because there was some moral recognition that it was wrong. Slavery came to an end because it was no longer economically viable. There was no profit that the Europeans, they didn't see the profit, that would develop their societies. And that is how it came to an end. It's not that they thought that it was so morally wrong. And so therefore, how it is now that you're going to ask them to apologize for something for which they never apologized because they never saw any wrong to it.
That is the perspective of Eric Williams, who wrote his book, Sugar and Slavery, years ago. He was the one
Capitalism and Slavery.
Capitalism and Slavery. Yeah. He was the one who mooted the perspective. But we have to remember that had the slave not risen up in Haiti, and the protests and the revolts in Haiti having spread throughout the other colonies in the Caribbean, even into America, right? All the wars against slavery and so on, and the battles and the struggles against slavery in America was sparked in Haiti. And had Haitians not risen up and fought and won their rights to be free, and was severely punished for it, and are still suffering today because of that, the slave system would have persisted. Slavery did not end because it was no longer economically viable. Okay, it was slavery ended primarily because the slaves decided we are not going to be slaves anymore.
They were self-liberated. And so,
Eric Williams does have...
He does make a point.
Eric Williams does have a perspective which is worth considering. And he made a lot of money from that perspective, I would imagine. But it remains, the truth remains, that the slaves took their freedom. Nobody gave it to them. And it's the same way we're going to have to rise up and take our reparations.
As a matter of fact, I will continue on Tatum's point. While that is true, as per Sir Eric Williams' point, again, we have to say that throughout slavery, from the very beginning, there was resistance.
And revolt.
Okay? There was bloody revolt. There were many different types of resistance, both men and women.
They resisted in Africa.
Precisely, from the very start. Africa. So we cannot say that it's not as if Africans sat idly by and just waited until Europe saw it no longer feasible. Okay, they were fighting. There was maroonage. I mean, the Dominican Negma War, the Jamaican Maroons, the Maroons of St. Vincent, all of those islands, even here in St. Kitts, as a matter of fact. The very first revolt to take place happened here in St. Kitts in 1639 at Derby. And I think this is something we have to, teach, because people may not know that. 60 enslaved persons ran up into Mount Lyamiga. It is only the topography of our island that made it much easier for them to be found, unlike places like Dominica, unlike places like Jamaica. The enslaved were very ingenious in the creating of tunnels and places where they went to hide out. They were, you know, the women found their own way of having resistance, from whether it was aborting babies. Some people may not want to hear that, but in, you know, aborting their children by using herbs was a form of resistance, because they did not want their children being born into slavery, committing infanticide, and so on. You know, the burning of houses, of the great houses, the burning of fields. So we can't just say that, simply put it that, so our people have to understand that Africans always had that spirit of wanting their freedom back. And whether it is they came from Africa or whether they were born here, that spirit was within them.
Yes, we have a call. Mm-hmm. Working for you, good afternoon. Working for you, good afternoon. I'm not hearing anything at the moment. But of course, right, thank you so much for your commendation. Of course, you know, Carla, you were speaking about the pushback against slavery in terms of the revolts, the resistance, the maroonage, and all of that sort of a thing, that the Africans did not sit down and just take it. Yes, they were constantly resisting and revolting. Mr. Tatum, you mentioned the Haitian Revolution, which was the largest insurrection, of course, in the Caribbean, which lasted from 1971 to 1804, and which spurred other insurrections throughout the region and so on. And here we are, 2020, with another insurrection, the Caribbean Reparations Commission. Working for you, good afternoon. Hello?
Okay, let me just say, while we are with that caller, we are not in any way trying to discount what you said, Dr. Eric Williams, okay? Was very instrumental. So it was combined. We are saying it's a combination of things, because let us not forget that, you know, they were losing a lot of money. Sugar was dying.
So it was both economic.
Yeah. So and with all of the revolt, it was costing them a lot more. And yeah, so they were losing and that sort of thing. So anyway, do we have a call?
But the social inequalities as well caused that insurrection. There were social inequalities, but the Europeans were not concerned about social inequalities. They were concerned about economic loss. And I think that was Dr. Eric Williams' point.
Right.
The social inequalities never mattered to them. In fact, they benefited from the social inequalities. What mattered to them was that, of course, it was a system, mercantilist system, in which they benefited economically.
You know, the thing about the perspective presented by the great man, the great historian, is that we have to recognize that things are always in flux, no matter what it is. And slavery was no different. The development, Europe, remember, it was slavery that brought about whatever economic benefits and gains and industrial gains that would have reduced the demand for the level or it was slavery that brought about the development of Europe. So it is not a miracle that these plantations in the Caribbean, some of us...
Just hold your point there, yes. Mr. Tatum. We do have a call. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
Right. I just want to point out, I think it is historically inaccurate and intellectually dishonest for us to claim that there was no moral element to the fight for the abolition of slavery. Certainly, there was much slave resistance, and definitely sugar had become, or was becoming, economically not viable. But to dismiss the contribution of fellows like Wilberforce and Granville Sharp, and even here in St. Kitts, where Lawyer Stevens mounted a platform of arguments against the inhumanity, the brutality of slavery. To deny that, I think, really is doing an injustice to the facts. So that, one, we have to agree that with a combination of factors which converge at that particular point in time to create the conditions conducive for slavery to end. But we cannot say there was no moral element to the struggle.
Caller, we have not...
My concern is that it would be a Pyrrhic victory at best, if, after reparations are paid in full, irrespective of what form some reparations take, black people still continue to be marginalized, we still continue to be violent, we live a life that is less than full, a life that is less than satisfying. We are not, we have not changed our fundamental behavior towards one another. That's my concern. I'm not asking anyone to share it. It is my idiosyncratic personal belief that if reparations are in fact paid, and I really have my doubts about that, and we as a race, we as a people continue to carry on the same old, it will be a Pyrrhic victory at best. Thank you.
Capitalism
and
slavery is that the overriding factor was that of economic inviolability.
I don't know if he said it was the overriding factor. I think his argument would have been that it was a pivotal factor, but I don't know if he really stated it was an overriding. Because
overriding?
I think he did use the word overriding?
He didn't use the word overriding.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock, and I know I'm not the host, I guess, because I'm hosting
You want
shows.
us to translate
I really
to
want to go to the present, and I like what Mr. Blake just said with regards to changes. And what I'd like to say, though I like what he said, I don't want us to wait until we are paid, because nobody is going to be standing out there handing out any checks. So the payment has to begin now with ourselves. And what I would like to make sure to say here categorically is that the committee will need the support of the people. It will need very much the support of the government. This is not going to be some committee that is just named for naming's sake. This is called Working for You, the show. And so the government of St. Kitts is going to work for us by making sure to support this committee and the work that it has to do.
Good point, Carla. We have another call.
Thank you.
Working for You, good afternoon.
Greetings to everyone there.
Greetings.
Now, brothers and sisters, Sister Carla,
You're breaking up, Tris.
We're hearing you. Go ahead.
Okay. First, I would like to, our people, we must stop referring to our African ancestors as slaves. We ain't come from the slaves. We come from kings and queens, African kings and queens. And we must sit down in this nonsense about our enslavers as quote-unquote slave masters. That's utter nonsense. There was evil people, and we must demand of this administration that August 1st of every year is a public holiday, not no August Monday nonsense. We must done with that. If it falls on a Monday, so be it. So be it. And we must teach our children from a very early stage of the greatness of the African that was inherited from the wicked British people. And I can't say that with no water in my mouth, beloved. And we have some people there who are descendants of Caucasian people that benefited from our enslavement right there in St. Kitts and Nevis. And you are not who? Yes. How come I'm hearing from them? Is that certain individual who always enrage you talking about this and legal affairs, Charles Wilkins? And others, how come they don't mention nothing and ask for forgiveness and pay reparation and the National Fund in St. Kitts and Nevis? Come on, we want to start with you, then Sister Carla.
Okay.
National Reparations Committee, you must do town hall meetings.
Yes, okay.
Yes, Carla is right. We continued town hall meetings. We, we have on our agenda programs within the schools. As I said, we want people to brainstorm. We want to bring the ideas to us as much as possible. So we are talking about the present, okay? And I spoke about our government. So the government has made one huge step in the formation of this committee. They have already shown support, and we want their continued support. There's a lot of work to be done, and as I said, we can't do it alone. It has to be done with the help of the government. There's a lot of ways in which we can begin to change. We can begin to repair ourselves by, doing the necessary research, okay, as much as possible so that we can change the way our outlook from having a stronger African consciousness to the way in which we eat, the way in which we behave, the sort of things we get involved in, all of those things. Our attitude to one another, as Mr. Blake talked about. So all of those things we don't have to wait on anybody to do for us. This is how we repair. We're repairing ourselves so that we can begin to change. And I know, I listened last week to a show which the deputy chair had with Honorable Mark Brantley. And I know Honorable Mark Brantley was so knowledgeable. He knows his stuff. And I'm thinking, all of these ministers, all of these people in Parliament, they know history. I'm not teaching them anything that they don't know. I listened to the Prime Minister last night, and he quoted something that he, in some speech he was given, he quoted something there, which has to do with slavery as well. And so I know they know, So it is for all of us, everyone has a duty to help to build our people's consciousness and to change from that Eurocentric way that we have of doing things, and find a new way as we move forward. Because we seem to be caught up in this sort of wanting to do things the same way that the English had foisted upon us many years ago. Okay, we have that way about us in which we're doing things. Mm-hmm.
I know that, Carla, that Caricom has implemented as well some relay and youth rallies in terms of the Caribbean Reparations Commission. And these rallies should really be implemented over 12 months. That they began in August 2016, in which the objectives are public education, public dialogue, building awareness and a knowledge base, fostering buy-in by youth, which goes back to my question before.
Yeah.
How do you, rebranding and recasting how reparations is seen and understood. So in terms of the younger generation, what have we done? Have we had any sort of a youth rally here in trying to achieve those objectives? Because that is one of the ways in which Caricom hopes to educate.
Well, we do have plans. As I said, we just started in February, and COVID came upon us by mid-March. We were in lockdown and so on. So we've got to go one step at a time. We've just come out of an election, 2 months today. Congratulations to the government. And now I'm all fired up, okay? The committee is fired up. We want our community to be fired up as well. I think over the past week we have been successful in getting people fired up and commenting. I'm happy to hear Mr. Blake on a number of programs. He hosted Frank and Candid. We had a very lively conversation there as well. So let's continue that push. Let's continue working. Let's hope, we'll see some articles in the media. We will see some more programs on the various radio stations. We are hoping to do something with the youth. For the youth, I want to put out a call, and I have to take it to the committee, so we can formalize this. Maybe our art students can begin putting together some sort of design that could be the emblem of our logo for the St. Kitts Nevis National Reparations Committee. So I mentioned it on the square on Saturday. I'm mentioning it here. It's not formalized as yet, but just throwing it out there so the children, the young people who are on vacation right now looking for something to do, start working around that. Start playing with your, scribbles and so on, and start to come up with something. Do some research so that by the time this competition is launched, you are able to be a part of it, be ready for it. So that's one of the initiatives. There's an initiative to actually work with our history teachers, because CAPE and CXC, there's a booklet being formulated at the Caricom level, at the Caricom Center for Reparations Research. I think it's called the Center for Reparations Research, CRR. They're putting together a booklet for the CXC and CAPE students. So, because it's going to be included. It's part of the syllabus. So we are going to push for us to have a seminar for history teachers in the Federation so that they could better deliver the subject to their students. So there are many things in the works.
Now, is there any representative from the church on the committee? Because the church, of course, in large measure, contributed to some of the theories that we have, especially about God, and especially about, because if we are made in the image,
and a whole other show you.
I know, we are made in the image and likeness of God, and we have been portrayed with a white Jesus. Jesus was not even white. The historical Jesus was not white.
I think the church,
with blue eyes and all of that sort of a thing. In other words, Christianity came out of Europe. And of course, we were Europeanized and in some way psychologically conditioned in certain ways also by religion. And that we cannot escape.
But you can't forget
this. And therefore, there has to be some sort of a decolonization of religion. Decolonization of religion.
Mr. Williams, what I will say to you, because you are someone I've known for a very long time, we don't at this time have someone on the committee, but I do plan to put forward a name to the powers that be. So for a number of names, as a matter of fact, I think the committee needs to be expanded. Okay? The people who were invited, if they did not get the email or whatnot, but I have some suggestions for some people who I think should be a part of the committee, and so I'm going to make a proposal so that they could be incorporated, including someone from the church or from the churches. You being a good Catholic, you don't mind me saying that, like myself, I'm not going to run away from who we are, right? We do know that the church, our church here in the Caribbean, made a concerted effort to bring the culture, our culture, into the church. Okay? Back in the 1980s, when you and I were younger,
enculturation,
we had the church Catholic and the Caribbean. So I can go to Trinidad, I can go to Dominica, Jamaica, and I can feel the culture. I've attended services that's done in Creole. Okay? We bring that dance, we bring the drums, we bring the steel pan into the church, where once upon a time that wasn't done. So you can see some changes. You have seen in some churches the blackening of the statue that they would have had as a representative of who they think Jesus would have been. That idea of a light-skinned Jesus has long passed. As I said, I've said on many shows, from me personally, growing up, I know the continent of Africa, there's no way that Jesus, in my mind, could have been black. But as I said, we can go down a whole other street when it comes to religion.
Well, it's not a matter of in other words, colorizing Jesus.
Right.
That is not the whole thing.
Yeah, but
I mean, the historical Jesus would have been of a particular race.
Yes.
The historical Jesus would have been of a particular race. And that race was not Caucasian. That much I know.
But it's very difficult for it to have been. I was gifted with an African study Bible many years ago, and the characters, as they were portrayed as we were growing up, we were seeing a light-skinned Moses, a light-skinned Noah. Everything was light-skinned. Everything was white. You understand? So we had to come to an understanding that the Bible story takes place on the continent of Africa.
Yes.
Okay? And so that's a whole other show.
Okay, now, before we leave, of course, it is important. Yes, we have Caricom, and Caricom have set up this 10-point plan with respect to reparations, and in all Caricom territories, their local reparations committee. Could you mention again, Carla, in terms of the buy-in, especially at the national level, and in terms of what Caricom is trying to do and to seek, you know, from the national level in terms of reparations? What kind of support is needed from the public? I would like you to you know, reiterate that.
Well, basically, I would like for people to support initiatives put on by the committee a lot more. It has to be taken seriously, whether it's government and persons in the public. I think when you hear about it, come out to it. We're hoping to have persons come and give lectures. Well, at least when the borders are open, people can come here and give lectures, and seminars can be held. We may have some Zoom or some things on social media. You know, try and participate as much as possible. This is not, someone said to me on Friday night that a lot of these things look like Rasta things. And so people have a concept. I'm glad you brought that up, because people have a concept of these things being Rasta, so they don't want to be a part of it. But my thing is, had it not been for the advocacy of the Rastafarian movement over decades now, as I said, from the 1970s, from the Black Power movement to the birth of Rastafarianism here in this region. In Jamaica, it started much early, but had it not been for them and for building that consciousness within us, for an appreciation for our hair. Look at locks today. People are wearing locks, but how many people were crucified because of their wearing of their locks, because of going natural? People are learning now about a vegan lifestyle, you know. When Rastafarians were touting it for years, we were not listening. They were talking about the herb. We are seeing the herb being used today. Okay, so all of these things that the Rastafarians were advocating for many decades ago are now being embraced. Yet, we want to see things like pushing us forward in terms of emancipation and reparations as things Rasta. Like, why are we trying to denigrate the Rasta? Again, it goes back to the divide and rule. You understand? Why would you want to think of Rastas as being less when they were much more informed, they were much more proactive, they advocated a lot more, and so we should be happy to get within their realm. You understand? We have this negative view of the Rastafarian, and so we don't want to be a part. And I don't see that should be an issue for us. You know, you hear of something, it's not about Rastafarians, it's about us as black people. The Rastas have been concerned about the upliftment of us as a race, of African people. That is their objective. And so we should not want to be staying apart and playing like this society thing. Like, you know, you want to be where light-skinned people are, you want to be in society in this sort of thing. That seems to be what is a lot about our image. And I want us to move away from that and relax ourselves on these sort of misconceptions that we have surrounding the pushing forward of ourselves.
Thank you, Carl. Extremely
people.
Passionate.
Thank you.
Mr. Tatum, I just want 20 seconds for you to say what you have to say. We have to wrap up. We're out of time.
Well, it's a privilege to have been invited to be part of this interactive program, and I'll be happy and delighted to participate on another occasion.
Mm-hmm. Right. I know there is a lot more that we can say, and this conversation can go on for, it has been going on for a very long time. And, you know, an hour and a half is not enough to fully debate this conversation, which has to do with centuries of how people were treated in terms of their humanity, and how some people were disadvantaged and other people and societies were advantaged. And now the case for British slave reparations can no longer be pushed really aside. And that I must agree with. And so the global debate is now focused on those nations who built their wealth by denying people humanity. I want to thank Carla Astefan, who is chair of the St. Kitts and Nevis National Reparations Committee, and Mr. Laughlin Tatum for coming and being a part of such an important topic today, that of racial justice. Thank you very much, and we do look forward to having you at some other point where we can continue this dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you who tuned in today to Working for You. We continue to appreciate your presence from week to week. Thank you to all of our callers and our listeners. Next week, we will be back with another edition of Working for You. Until then, I am Les Roy Williams. Take care.